This is America, a country that's just signed a Memorandum of Understanding to end the war with Iran. But does it really end the war, or does it just push the core issues of the conflict further down the road? And what do the American people think about the deal that's been reached? I'll have more on that, but first to Neave Barker in our Washington studio.
Thank you, Alan. Well, the immediate threat of war has receded, but while global markets welcome this ceasefire extension, the hardest diplomatic work still lies ahead. Washington and Tehran's new Memorandum of Understanding buys time, but defers the thorniest security issues. So where do these negotiations go from here, especially when the deal doesn't only impact the region, but the world?
The Fox News alert. President Trump says a deal with Iran is now complete.
After nearly 4 months of war.
To begin winding down the war that's upended the global economy.
The deal includes an immediate end to military operations.
The reopening of the key shipping route, the Strait of Hormuz.
The signing ceremony will be held this Friday, and that's in Switzerland.
So negotiators have just 60 days to tackle the very issues that helped trigger the conflict. And with Washington divided over the deal, can Trump turn this ceasefire into lasting peace? Here's our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett.
U.S. President Donald Trump at the G7 summit in France this week, selling his Memorandum of Understanding between the United States and Iran.
On Sunday, we reached an agreement with Iran that achieves everything we set out to accomplish, everything and much more.
It will extend the U.S.-Iran ceasefire 60 days, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, end the U.S. naval blockade, and begin negotiations toward a broader peace deal.
Iran has agreed that they will neither produce nor procure a nuclear weapon.
But the memorandum is just a framework, not a peace deal. As negotiations launch, both sides have just weeks to resolve issues lingering for decades. Can Iran still enrich uranium for civilian needs? To what level? Will nuclear infrastructure be dismantled? And most importantly for the U.S., how will Iran's compliance be verified?
Will nuclear inspectors be allowed back in?
Yes, absolutely. That's, in fact, one of the core parts of the agreement.
Iran's long maintained it's not seeking a nuclear weapon. Trump must demonstrate this deal does more than secure Iranian promises. For years, Trump railed against the 2015 JCPOA negotiated under President Barack Obama. In 2016, Trump accused Obama of releasing $400 million in cash that Trump says was used to fund Iranian proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah. Now, Trump's under pressure to prove his deal's stronger, as Iran is reportedly seeking far larger sums, $24 billion. Trump says Iran's agreed to stop funding proxy groups. How that's verified has yet to be worked out. But Trump insists no money will exchange hands in any way, shape, or form. The U.S. is also looking to restrain Iranian-funded missile groups, a major issue for America's ally, Israel. Its spokesman says Israel will not tolerate attacks from Hezbollah on its territory and will continue to act against those who seek to harm its citizens. That's why success of any future deal rests partly on what happens between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Still unaddressed is the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's ability to disrupt one of the world's busiest energy corridors, impacting the global economy, was a strategic win. Still unaddressed, how to keep the strait open and prevent Iran from monetizing it in the future. Then there are Trump's domestic challenges. Trump must prove Americans are better off because of his unpopular conflict. As conservative influencers like Eric Erickson say, Trump has surrendered to Iran. On Sunday, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham also posted, "I'm somewhat concerned Iran's description of the agreement differs from the White House's description." But Trump says he's not worried.
And it's a memorandum of understanding. If it doesn't get done in 60 days, that's all right. We go back to bombing.
The clock is ticking. Despite a ceasefire, the threat of renewed conflict remains and looms over negotiations. Kimberly Halkett, Al Jazeera, the White House.
OK, well, our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, joins us now from the White House with more on this. Alan, J.D. Vance has been fielding questions from the media. What's he had to say about all these plans?
Well, remember, he's going to be leading up the US negotiating team when they finally head over to Switzerland. He's saying that the benefits of the deal are already being felt. The Strait of Hormuz is open in the first few hours. 12.5 million barrels of oil passed through the strait. The blockade of Iran is over. CENTCOM has confirmed that. American ships are pulling back. They're letting ships go in and out of the Iranian ports. All of that is really important. He's also said that there's going to be not a cent of American money handed over to the Iranians. There are benefits there for them if they act like a normal nation, he says. And he made sure that people know that the United States wants to have a relationship with Iran, but they have to meet certain targets. They have to perform if that's to happen.
If the Iranians don't change their behavior, their military and their nuclear program is still destroyed. If they do change their behavior, then they are going to have a transformative relationship with the Middle East, and the Middle East will have a transformative relationship with the people of Iran. That's a win for the American people and for the President of the United States.
So there's been a lot of criticism of Donald Trump, and not just from Democrats, from Republicans as well, and not just from the usual Republicans that you would think. There's been criticism from people who would consider themselves huge allies of Donald Trump, perhaps even friends of Donald Trump. J.D. Vance dismissed that. He said he can't quite understand why people think that Donald Trump would do a deal that was bad for the American people. He now has 60 days to deliver on a deal that everyone can look at and see whether or not it is good for the American people, good for Iran, good for the Middle East, and good for the world.
Alan Fisher, our chief US correspondent there, speaking from the White House. Many thanks for that, Alan. Well, hopefully we'll have some of those questions answered in our discussion. We've got two men who've stood at the absolute centre of American foreign policy and communications. Introducing our guest panel, David Hale is a former US ambassador and special envoy for Middle East peace, and PJ Crowley, a former US Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs. A pleasure having both of you on This is America. So, Ambassador Hale, you've spent decades at the heart of complex balances of power across the Middle East and the wider region. Looking at this new Memorandum of Understanding, is a 60-day pause enough of a strategic window to hammer out all that needs to be hammered out?
Well, we'll see, right, in the next 60 days, just how far we can get in implementing this MOU and tackling the issues that are left fairly vague in the MOU as related to the nuclear program. One would have hoped to have seen a declaration of principles which would spell out in more detail what the actual goals are and commitments are going to be made. But the next 60 days, we'll see that. And the president has said, obviously, that if progress isn't made, the MOU will expire in 60 days.
Just briefly, what do you mean by a declaration of principles? How does that differ to an MOU?
I don't want to split hairs, but in negotiating difficult conflicts like this, there's usually a document of about the same length in which both sides say, our war is over, and these are the things we're going to tackle to have a normal relationship. It's not quite there. This is, as I said, just a bit vaguer than you would expect in, say, what Jordan and Israel agreed to decades ago, Egypt and Israel in the 70s.
PJ, we've seen the markets doing rather well off the back of this news. We've seen oil prices start to fall. Obviously, this means the immediate conflict is over. It means an opening of the Strait of Hormuz. But what about the core issues? What does this 60-day window mean to you?
I think the 6-day window will be the start of what I think will be a lengthy process. Go back to the JCPOA. It took more than 2 years to negotiate highly technical, details. So things I'll be looking for is will we take advantage of negotiations that were going on in January prior to the start of the conflict? So is there a baseline somewhere in the body of work that's been done to this point that allows them then to pick that up and move forward? And the second thing is, from an American standpoint, who will be part of this negotiating team? And are they going to beef up with technical details? Because the one thing we do know, Iran has very experienced negotiators. They are expert at negotiating detail by detail by detail. That suggests to me this is going to be a lengthy process.
All of these are knowables right now, but let's pivot right now to how all of this is being managed and projected, most importantly here at home in the US. The administration's pushing this narrative as a massive pragmatic win for American stability. This week we saw intense synchronized media pushes by the White House to frame this pretty much as an absolute triumph. Have a look at how Vice President J.D. Vance has been laying the groundwork. This is on Monday.
It's fundamentally a good deal for the American people. The United States wins either way. What the president is trying to do is actually extend the hand of peace. If the Iranians comply, benefits will flow to them, and that's what we hope to see. What the president really wanted to do, not just with the last 6 weeks, but really the last year and a half of Iran policy, is to get us to a place where we could change our relationship fundamentally with the Iranians and ensure that they never have a nuclear weapon.
So a massive PR blitz, I think you should call it. But from a public diplomacy standpoint, PJ, how difficult is it to sell this vision back home?
Well, as David was saying, it is good for everyone that the conflict has ended, at least in this particular phase. That's a positive. That's a win for the United States. It's a win for Iran. It's a win for the region. Now what? Now comes the hard part. And it'll be important, in terms of David's point about statement of principles, some of those are actually woven into the MOU. One of the ones I'll be looking at very carefully is the 60-day restriction on free passage through the Strait of Hormuz. One thing about the Iranians and their negotiating tactics, that if you go back to the JCPOA, what was in the document, in the JCPOA, they respected. And so what's in the MOU is at least an open invitation by Iran to say, after 60 days, we'll see. Maybe will be a fee structure that goes on after that. And I don't know that that will be where they go with that. But the presence of the Strait of Hormuz language in the MOU suggests that's going to be a bargaining chip that requires the United States to offer something meaningful in response as they get into the details.
All right, we will get into those details in a second, but I want a sense from you about the uphill struggle it will be for this administration to sell any kind of success at home, because there's going to have to be some pretty early wins to keep the ball rolling, surely.
Well, understand that on both sides, there are hard-line political factions that do not want any kind of agreement. Again, go back to the JCPOA. Benjamin Netanyahu came in and tried to torpedo, the agreement before Congress, and so you see the swords coming out. Okay. Any kind of agreement from certain bodies, political bodies on each side, it would be difficult for all sides to overcome them.
David?
Well, in the end, it's going to be results. In the meantime, obviously, deploying J.D. Vance as a way to get someone who was not very enthusiastic about this peace agreement on the flanks, working with conservative Republicans. How the economy fares will obviously be important. But most importantly, 60 days is not a very long time. So how far are we going to get? Because right now, this agreement has only two tangible things. Sanctions relief for Iran, which is a big concession, and reopening the Straits of Hormuz. What's next? And that's where I think our attention needs to lie.
All right, let's give you some data. And it's all about public opinion, because according to a YouGov poll, 2/3 of Americans say Trump has been ineffective in negotiating with Iran, while a clear majority of Americans disapprove of the way Trump is handling the situation overall. And disapproval has grown significantly since the start of the war. David, how does this administration go about closing that credibility gap?
Well, again, I think results matter. I mean, PJ and I work together on Middle East peace and messaging on that. And at the end of the day, people see through vague words. They see through statements that don't have follow through. So I think it's really going to be judged by what happens on the nuclear file, what progress we make with the Iranians in these negotiations.
Okay. All right, well, let's get into the weeds and start with an easy topic, the Strait of Hormuz. Paragraph 4 of the Memorandum of Understanding suggests the US will lift the naval blockade up front and fully within 30 days. I mean, all of this before securing any kind of concessions regarding Iran's nuclear ambitions. I mean, what does that mean for Washington to effectively surrender at this stage one of its biggest points of leverage? David?
Well, we'd reached a point when the Iranians closed Hormuz. They thought it was, they checked us, if you take a chess game analogy, but we did a checkmate with the blockade. So how are you going to resolve this? We could have continued with military pressure. We could have waited for the economic squeeze that Iran was going to suffer, or we can do a negotiation. They chose the negotiation. But again, there's nothing, as the president has said, there's nothing irreversible on either side, frankly, about these commitments.
PJ, how does it affect the psychology of ongoing talks to lift this U.S. naval blockade this early on?
Well, I think it was something that both sides wanted and needed, from an economic standpoint, relieve some of the global energy inflation, and to have a stream of revenue that Iran can use to begin a lengthy process of rebuilding their infrastructure. So that's the easy part in my mind. The hard part comes later in terms of how do you finesse the question of right of enrichment, and then how fast do you end sanctions and give Iran access to cash, something that that Trump was highly critical of, or the Obama administration, plane loads of cash going to Tehran. Now he's finding himself in a very similar conundrum.
The Iranians are still talking about something they're calling transit security compliance, and according to paragraph 5 of the MOU, Iran will conduct some sort of dialogue with the Omanis to work out some kind of protocol. I mean, they're not calling it a fee, they're not calling it they're not giving it a price tag, but
Administrative,
how do you read this?
Administrative arrangements, I think, is the term of art there.
How do you call, is it a pilot fee? Are the Iranians going to benefit financially? How's that going to reflect on the Trump administration?
I'm sure that's what they have in mind, but it's not spelled out in the agreement. And the agreement actually turns the negotiation not just to Oman, but to the other Arab states, the GCC plus Iraq, which all have a stake in this. And I doubt very much if they're going to allow Iran to have a fee structure that's controlling the Straits of Hormuz.
This sounds like constructive ambiguity right now to get things over the line before they work it out later, right?
The other piece of the language in the agreement is that consistent with international standards, from an American standpoint, this would say, a fee, some sort of toll is illegal. So I think this is both sides setting in motion some of their starting positions for what will be a critical element of the negotiation to come.
Well, the Iranians say there's already a precedent for this in places like the Strait of Malacca, or the Suez Canal, or these kind of places, the Bosphorus, for instance. That it's perfectly legal and right for them to charge a piloting fee through territorial waters.
I don't think international lawyers would really sustain that argument. Canals are different; they do require costs to maintain. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't answer about the Straits of Malacca or the Bosphorus, but I don't believe that anything the Iranians have in mind is similar.
Okay.
And from an American standpoint, freedom of navigation has been one of those pillars of foreign policy going back.
On that point, then, how do the Americans that, as you rightly say, have been these custodians of international trade, keeping the shipping lanes open, how do they now feel about the potential for the Iranians to slap a fee on this international body of water?
That's why I think that what Iran is saying, okay, this is something we can do, either legally or just simply by power politics. If we're going to give this up, what are we getting in return? And at least in the document, it gives Iran a point of leverage that they will try to employ at some point productively during the upcoming negotiations.
All right, gentlemen, let's take a look a bit more about the international optics and how America's allies have been regarding all of this, because the president has been exceptionally clear that his deal is unmatched, that his diplomatic prowess is unmatched. I mean, let's take a look at how he's been selling it at the G7 in France this week.
So this is a memorandum of understanding, but it's a very strong one. A lot of great things are going to happen in the Middle East right now. We have a deal that's a fair deal. It's a good deal. The Iran deal that we made is going to bring a lot of success to the world.
All right. Well, gentlemen, we know that the actual signing, we've got it in the wall over there, Donald Trump making his signature very clear and very bold with a Sharpie pen. The Palace of Versailles, the symbolism not lost on any of us. 1919, the Treaty of Versailles to end World War I was signed there. David, what do you make of this political theatre?
It's very presidential, very Trumpian. I think it's good to have our allies there to support us in a moment like this, so that's all positive. I do think, because implicit, I think in the discussion so far, is what's changed here, right? Is the MOU really fundamentally different than where we were 3 months ago. And I think it's important then to widen the aperture. And the power equation that has changed in the Middle East since 2023 to today, it wasn't just about the contents of this MOU. It's about preventing Iran from being able to project power and set the timetable and calendar for the entire region as they had up until 2023. I think time will tell. I happen to believe that probably Iran's ability to project power has been significantly neutralized. The missiles they threw into Israel last week were not something like 11, as opposed to what we saw in the past. So, but that to me is also the standard. We have to keep that context in mind about which way is the power equation. The Iranians are going to pretend this MOU has put them back on top. I don't think it does, unless America pulls out, declares victory before we've completed the task.
Also in that video, it's behind you, gentlemen, we have Emmanuel Macron, just out of shot, you'll see him in a second, beaming with joy by the looks of it. The Europeans were very, very reluctant to throw their weight and support behind any kind of war with Iran. Do you think they back this memorandum of understanding, PJ?
I think they do, for pragmatic reasons, because it instantly relieves some pressure on the global economy. But candidly, we are in a much weaker position internationally than we were going back to 2013, 14, and 15 with the JCPOA. Especially, go back to the original Iran deal, you had great cooperation by China and Russia. You had a common front in dealing with Iran, and that made a difference towards the end of that negotiation. We're very fragmented now. Trump's relationship with Europe is poor. We're in adversarial relationships now with Russia and China. So this is really more of a one-on-one game, it's hard to see that the international community will play a significant role. They could at the 11th hour, but right now, we don't have the international support that we had during the previous negotiation.
Understood. Let's turn specifically to another meaty topic, the nuclear reality on the ground, because Trump's framing of the nuclear threat has been absolute. Here's how the White House has chosen to define the campaign. Gentlemen, on the big wall behind you over there: obliterated, destroyed, decimated, wiped out, bullseye, monumental, damage. Excuse the kind of very Marvel-esque setup that we have there, but it kind of hits home, doesn't it? David, looking at these explosive words, they're highly aggressive, they're triumphalist. Where do we go from here?
Well, I mean, this is what we've seen as the use of even weaponization of rhetoric in American diplomacy that is novel. We've not seen this before. The Iranians do it. Now our president does it as well. It's part of his nature. I wouldn't necessarily overreact or overinterpret every single tweet we see. But he set out a very high standard at the beginning of the war. But if you look at actually the way we were equipped to conduct the war, it was not an unconditional war, which is what would have brought you those words he's using.
The reason why we're pitching it like that to you is because he's clearly positioned the nuclear file as a major priority. But nevertheless, the nuclear protocols aren't even introduced until paragraph 8 of the MOU. I mean, far down the page for an issue that was supposedly one of the principal reasons why the US went to war in the first place. PJ, how do you explain that?
Well, I think the good news here is that the combination of military action last year and this year has bought some time. Whatever's beneath the rubble, it has set back the Uranium program by a number of years. To me, the variable is on the Iranian side, is what lesson do they draw, from what has just happened, and do they look at the fact that Trump continues to threaten Iran, but no longer threatens North Korea? What's the lesson here? Is the lesson to actually move from being somewhere just short of the line and actually jump over the line at some point going forward? So this is where the negotiation in terms of if you are able to kick the nuclear can down the road 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, that probably is good diplomacy.
Well, talking about good diplomacy, let me ask you about this, because another principal war aim was to also remove Iran's ballistic missile capability, used, of course, to strike Israel and where I'm normally based in Qatar and other Gulf states. This is what Donald Trump has literally earlier on today been saying about that issue.
I'm saying that if other countries have them, it's a little bit unfair for them not to have some. A ballistic missile is not the same thing as what we're talking about when we talk nuclear. But if Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and they all have some. I would say in relative proportion, I think it's okay.
David, how will that monumental backpedal go down in Tel Aviv, do you think?
Not very well, nor in conservative ranks in America. The missile program was one of the major talking points against JCPOA, although JCPOA did not have provisions about the missiles.
PJ, your thoughts?
It is a backpedal, and by the same token, realistically, we threw everything that we had militarily at Iran, and things survived. Whether it's ballistic missiles, drones, the Iranian military was decimated in certain dimensions, including the naval dimension, but they retain a capability to threaten their neighbors.
Gentlemen, very, very quickly, we've got half a minute left. If there is no success during this 60-day window, is there a plan B, David?
I think going back to war is definitely an option, but it's close to our midterms, so it'd be difficult.
I think we'll see if Donald Trump finally has some patience on the negotiating front. I think this is going to go on for some time.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure hearing your expert thoughts and analysis and insight on all of this. We've definitely learned some things that we didn't know before. The Memorandum of Understanding, no doubt, will become a lot clearer to us in the weeks and months to come. Ambassador David Hale, former US Ambassador and Special Envoy for Middle East Peace, and former US Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs, PJ Crowley. A pleasure. And that's all from the team here in Washington, handing back to Alan Fisher and Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha.
Thanks, Neave. Well, if you've missed any part of this episode and you want to catch up, you can do so anytime, any place by going to our YouTube channel, search for Al Jazeera English and click on the This Is America tab. We'll be back with new programs Monday to Friday at 18:30 GMT. That's 2:30 if you're watching here on the East Coast. In the meantime, thanks for watching and see you soon.